in the year 2525.
Welcome everyone to the third decade of this century. Hard to believe, and when I think about the year 2020, I still kind of think, oh, that's way off in the future, but clearly it isn't. And I'm actually old enough to remember when the year 2000 seemed to be inconceivably far off in the future, and here we are 20 years beyond that. It's like some kind of science fiction movie come true. I'm sure some of the older viewers feel the same way, maybe even more extreme. For 80s kids, this does feel like living in the future. And, to kind of celebrate, I thought it'd be appropriate to go back about 20 years to the year 2000, the sort of retro future, and take a look at a computer built in that time, except as you'll notice here, this is just an empty case. So this is actually a new old stock, or really, really close to a new old stock. It was when I bought it 2 years ago, this IBM Aptiva. The model number is 2270. There isn't anything particularly special, I would say, about this computer other than it is new old stock, and I generally don't see this particular model of Aptiva on eBay ever. I mean, this is when I bought it, was pretty much the only time I've ever seen it on eBay, so it might be a little bit hard to find, especially in such a good condition. Now you're wondering, where are all the other stuff? Where's the internals? Well, here are the internals, and they're in a box in this nice little tote here. And the reason for that is basically as soon as I got this computer, without even hooking it up or testing it or anything, basically right out of the box as I got it, I took all of the internals out and put it in this container because the idea was I was going to turn this into basically a sleeper PC, and I ended up going with a different case, another IBM case. But that's a video, that's a story for another time. But essentially, this has just been sitting there, IBM Aptiva, new June 2017. It's been sitting there all that time, and so I thought today, to kind of celebrate the new year, put this 20-year-old system back together and boot it up. Although I'm not going to try to pair it with all of the correctly vintage peripherals and all that stuff. I'll save that for a different video because I do like to kind of collect all of the components from about the same time. But I do want to turn it on and see what is there. I assume it works just fine. I hope so. Anyway, if we get all the internals in there correctly, should be, I think there's a Windows, so it says Windows 98, which is of course correct for the year 2000. That would have been the operating system used primarily. And so hopefully we just have a clean install Windows 98 on this hard drive, but we'll find out. So first things first, let's go and take out each one of these components and see what we have. I honestly don't remember all of the components that this computer came with because, again, I basically just got it and took them all out. All right, let's see what we've got here. This nice little tote. There. All right, so the power supply, kind of interesting. It's a bit smaller than someone obviously took a tag off of it. Let's see, 150 watts. So obviously you're not going to be running a 2080 RTX on this or anything, but should be enough power, for a 2000 era Celeron. And I like those small power supplies because they don't take up much room and they don't block airflow, and just makes it easier to get the other components in there as well. All right, so the motherboard, let's take a look here. So we've got a PGA 370 slot on here. So this actually came up in a recent video where we were looking at the fastest possible AT style CPU motherboard combo. And this is obviously not an AT, this is an ATX motherboard with a 370 socket. But there are some AT motherboards with 370 socket that go up to at least 1 gigahertz. So I'd imagine this PGA 370 can at least take a 1 gigahertz copper mine processor. Might actually be able to take one of those Tula 10s up to 1.4 gigahertz. I actually don't know, but it's not what that's not the processor that came with this system, which I'll get to here in a moment. But we got 2 slots here. My guess would be you can put probably maybe up to 1 gigabyte of RAM, maybe 2 512 sticks in there. Maybe 512 maxing out there. I'm not actually certain. That's something we can find out. And then in terms of the input outputs, pretty standard stuff. Actually have 2 USB ports back there, onboard audio, onboard video, VGA, and your serial and parallel port on there. Okay, I've got the memory separated out here. All right, so we've got one 120 megabyte stick from Arch Memory and a 64 megabyte stick from Infineon. Oh, I've never actually heard of that one. That's kind of interesting. So, it might have been, I don't have a good explanation as to why these are from 2 different manufacturers. It seems like they would just use one. They are at least the same memory, PC 133, 133 megahertz. So yeah, kind of odd, but that is apparently what came with it. I don't think I added anything to this box other than what was taken out of that Aptiva case. So what we have here is just a standard modem, and a little space there for the phone jack, of course. Given the year, I would say this is most likely a 56K modem. Some random stuff. Some stuff for the monitor that I've got elsewhere. So ViewSonic monitor. The hard drive. So the hard drive here is a Seagate 4.3 gigabytes. Which honestly wasn't that great in 2000, 4.3 gigabytes. I know around 2000 I had a 10 gigabyte hard drive, and probably 20 gigabyte hard drives weren't really that difficult to find at that point. So, you're kind of getting the impression with the Celeron processor and so forth that came in here, this is sort of a lower end, cheaper system. Got some cables, of course, need those. The CD-ROM drive, just a standard CD-ROM drive. I'm not sure if this is 8X or what. April 2000. Yeah, so it doesn't actually tell you on it what the speed is, but my guess would be an 8X, 16X, something like that. Okay, now, for the astute viewer, what you're probably noticing is that, I got the plate in here, the back plate, is that I don't have the processor, and kind of wondering, because I have no particular reason to take that Celeron processor out, but let me go take a look at my my container of CPUs and see if I can find it. It's possible I did take it out and just forgot about it. But yeah, I have no idea why I would do that. Okay, so oddly enough, and this is slightly embarrassing, I cannot find the Celeron processor that should go into this computer. But instead, I've got this Pentium 3 933 megahertz copper mine processor, and I believe this should work just fine on this motherboard. So this most likely is an upgrade to the Celeron that was in there. Even if it was a 1 gigahertz Celeron, it's still outperformed by this 933 megahertz Pentium 3 processor. So I'm going to go ahead and install this on the motherboard. Hopefully everything works fine, so we'll find out there. So one last look here at all the components from my container, minus the, of course, new CPU and heatsink. But it occurred to me as I was going through here that what's missing is, of course, a dedicated video and graphics card. And there is onboard video and audio on this motherboard, so that's what we'll go with initially. I think later I have to come back and upgrade this with those dedicated expansion cards, since it does have some PCI slots. So yeah, it kind of reinforces this idea that actually probably this particular model, I don't know a whole lot about it, but probably was a pretty affordable model on the lower end of the spectrum, and would have been built to be one of the more affordable IBM Aptiva models, given that it came originally with a Celeron, because it has a Celeron sticker on it, and did not come with, I can tell you this for sure, did not come with a video card or a sound card. I don't remember those being part of this originally at all. So it's not that I just misplaced them like somehow I did with the CPU. It really did not come with those dedicated cards. All right, so let's get this motherboard put together here. So first of all, I'm going to put the new Pentium 3 processor on here. Should slip right down to place like that. Okay, next, the memory. I do hope that this doesn't have a problem with one 128 megabyte stick paired with a 64 megabyte stick. Since I'm pretty sure that's what it came with, it shouldn't have any problem with that. One of the potential downsides to using a Coppermine processor is actually that the CPU is exposed. It doesn't have that heatsink, that cap that the later processors had. So you do really have to be careful when putting the heatsink on there. So just put on a little bit of dab of thermal paste. And very carefully put this heatsink and fan on here. Okay, with a little bit of wrangling, I was able to get in there. Hopefully, no damage to the CPU. That's always the hope, I suppose. But yeah, the Coppermine processors are a little fragile. So, what can I say? Hopefully it works just fine. Now, I think I forgot to mention that I did not actually take the floppy drive out. So that is the original floppy drive in there. It's really the only thing that I left in there. This is not original, so I did get as far as putting a 120 millimeter fan in the front when I was going about thinking about turning this into a sleeper PC. That's about as far as I got. I also left the floppy drive in there because there really wasn't any reason to take it out, and obviously in terms of the aesthetics, even if I didn't end up using the floppy drive in the sleeper build, still gives that look of completeness and of being a vintage system. Now what I also had in there was this other back panel for the motherboard that I was going to put in there, the newer sleeper build motherboard, so we don't need that. What we do need is this one here, which is the correct one for this motherboard. And one of the things that that I've actually done before, and I know a number of people have actually done, is put the motherboard in and then realize that they hadn't put the back panel in yet. So make sure I do that first here. And before I put the motherboard in, I'm actually going to install the power supply. Again, it's kind of nice that this power supply does not take up much room at all. Gives some extra space, some breathing room for your hands and so forth when you put all the other components in here. All right, time to place the motherboard down and into the computer here. And yeah, the offsets are already in here and should be all ready to go. I always find this part to be a little nerve-wracking, like I'm going to drop it or something, but you know, that hasn't happened yet, but I suppose it could. Let's go ahead and connect the power supply here to the motherboard. This is back in the day when things were simple and you just had this one 20-pin connector to the motherboard. I just put the only peripheral card in there, and that is this modem. I don't really need it, but I figured I'd put it in there so I don't lose it at least. I almost forgot that this happens to be one of those latches where you actually take the screw out and then pull this back, and then you can insert the cards from there and it helps hold it in place. So you really only need one screw to hold multiple cards in place. That's kind of neat. Alright, it's time to put the hard drive and the CD-ROM drive in there, and I just want to point out the hard drive has this kind of neat rubber cover to it, kind of like a shock absorber or something like that. I haven't seen too many like this, so that's kind of neat. I didn't expect to find that. It's always really satisfying when the beige is all the same color. I don't know why it wouldn't be, since this is the CD-ROM that it came with, but. Okay, so I went ahead and connected the power to the hard drive, the CD-ROM drive, and the floppy drive. And I also plugged in the fans. I've got the 120 millimeter fan in the front there connected, as well as the power button and power light, hard drive light, and all that stuff. And thankfully I'd actually taken a photo of this before I took everything out, because they're not all that well marked, and actually I'd probably be kind of lost without these. So hopefully they are connected in the right configuration now. And if you ever take apart an old computer like this, and I think at some point in the future you might put it all back together, I do actually recommend taking a photo, especially of your front pin connectors here, just so that you have a record of what they look like and where those should actually go. It makes things a lot easier. So the only things left are really the cables, so this motherboard has a primary and secondary IDE. Right, and the IDE will connect to both hard drives and optical drives, and so I've got a couple cables. A shorter cable here I'll use for the hard drive. Now, you're probably already aware of this, but these IDE cables should have a pink strip along one side that would indicate the side that should be closest to the power connector. So this should connect in here like this. Then on the motherboard, most of these cables should have a little notch here that also indicates what direction they should go into the connector on the board, like so. And then this is the secondary. I'll put this in as secondary, the CD-ROM drive. Both of them actually go in the same direction. I almost forgot the FDD floppy drive cable here, because it's kind of tucked away back here. It happens to be right next to the power connector to the motherboard too, so it's kind of hard to get to. I really don't miss dealing with FDD cables and IDE cables. I'm quite happy with SATA cables. All right, so now that we've got it all together, I'm just going to hook up a monitor to it to power it up and make sure everything's working okay. I think I'll save any other further, look at this whole system once I get the correct monitor and the keyboard together and all that stuff, as I've been doing, and do a separate video on it once I've got all the components together. So I just grabbed whatever I could find down the basement real quick, and it just happened to be an IBM keyboard and mouse, so that's appropriate. Got my Gateway LCD monitor here, and let's see what we can see here. Hopefully everything's working at least. That's promising. It is saying 700 megahertz though, which, if you remember, the CPU I put in there is actually supposed to be 933. My guess is that that motherboard just can't handle maybe a 933 megahertz processor, and it's actually topping out then at 700. So there you have it. Pretty much a clean install of Windows 98 here on this computer, and I have to go through and probably load some drivers and so forth, but so pretty nice. And again, I don't know if I'll end up using this particular keyboard or not once I get the whole configuration together, but I want to get the right CRT monitor for this computer, and I think I basically already have the right speakers and maybe the right mouse as well, and get it all together and do another video just exploring this particular model. So thank you very much for watching, as always, and a very happy new year to you. I hope it's an excellent year, and I hope you'll come back and take a look at some of the new videos I've got coming out here in 2020. Well, if you stuck around this long, I think you deserve a little bit of bonus. And that is, I actually did find the processor. I'm about 99% sure that this is actually the correct processor that goes with this computer. It's a Celeron 500 megahertz. And then this is, I believe, the correct CPU heatsink and fan for this processor. So what's in there works fine. I probably will actually go back and replace it, the CPU I put in there, and put this one in there, because it is the correct one, is the one that it came with. So I think it's fine as it is, but I kind of like the idea of having it all as it came from the manufacturer, as they say.